Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefühl. You join us today in Tarragona. Now, those of you big Seat fans might recognize that as being the birthplace of the name of this car, the Tarraco, but we're not just here with this today. We also have the Ateca and the Arona. We're going to take a look at Seat's full lineup and see if we can find out just how they compare and just where they come from.
So before we drive all Seat SUVs in the cities that gave their name to the models, Tarraco for the ancient Tarragona, Ateca and Arona, let's give you a quick overview of the basic facts. The Tarraco is the biggest SUV in the lineup, with a length of 4.73 m or 186 inches. It is a sibling to the VW Tiguan Allspace and the Skoda Kodiaq, and it is built at the Volkswagen main plant in Wolfsburg, Germany. However, the design is somewhat distinct and the sportiest of the three siblings. You can even get 20-inch wheels. The interior of the Tarraco is indeed very spacious, not only compared to the other Seat SUVs, but also in this whole mid-size SUV segment. It features optional fabric Alcantara seats. The top infotainment spec consists of 10.25-inch digital instruments and a somewhat attached 8-inch touchscreen with their latest software. All Seat vehicles offer Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration meanwhile. The most special things about the Tarraco are the abundance of rear legroom and the possibility of a third seating row. You can easily fit 5 tall adults in this car, however the third seating row is rather for smaller people or kids. Sadly, there's no ISOFIX in the last seating row. The boot volume varies from 760 to 1920 liters for the 5-seater variant. Engines are 2-liter TDI, 2-liter TSI turbo petrol or 1.5-liter TSI for the Tarraco. The base price of the Seat Tarraco is about 30,000 euros in Germany. With 4.30 m thick or 172 inches, the Seat Ateca is 37 centimeters or 14 inches shorter than the Tarraco. What makes a significant difference in finding a parking spot in the city or not. You can imagine that the shorter wheelbase will also have a more agile driving experience. The Seat Ateca is built at Skoda in the Czech Republic and is indeed positioned in the middle. It's a good all-rounder vehicle, not too big, not too small. Same as with the Tarraco, you can get full LED headlamps for the Ateca. This car also introduced the interesting turning indicator, which then flashes instead of the LED daytime running light. 19-inch wheels are maximum. In the interior of the Ateca you can have several fabric and Alcantara seats, and there's also a lot of soft touch materials. You can also get digital instruments meanwhile, and the biggest screen is also at 8-inch, but looks smaller than in the Tarraco because it is very well integrated in the dashboard. However, you don't get the latest software version like in the Tarraco. Still, GPS and smartphone integration are just fine. The biggest screen is standard for all the high trim levels. Also in the Ateca you can easily sit with tall adults on all available seats, just that you don't have any spare legroom left then. You cannot move the rear bench forward or backwards, unlike in the Tarraco, Kodiaq or Tiguan. The boot volume is at 510 liters to 1605 liters, which is, you might remember, about 300 liters less than in the Tarraco. So the big difference from Tarraco to Ateca is that you have a little less legroom here. Definitely a shorter trunk and no 7-seater possibility, but you can have a shorter, more agile car. Oh, and talking about agility, the unique selling point of the Ateca is also that this one is available as Cupra Ateca, giving you 300 horsepower from a 2-liter turbo petrol engine. Tarraco and Arona you can only get as a sporty design trim called FR, then pick the strongest engine available from the normal lineup. The other Seat Ateca engines are the 2-liter TSI with lower horsepower specs, the 1.5-liter TSI and the 3-cylinder 1-liter TSI. As diesel you get the 2-liter TDI or the 1.6-liter TDI. Base price of the Seat Ateca is 21,000 euros in Germany. That's 9,000 euros less than the Tarraco and 22,000 pounds in the UK. Well, all Seat SUVs have their Spanish names, their Spanish development and their Spanish design, but only the smallest one, the Seat Arona, is a true Spaniard. That one is built at Seat HQ plant in Martorell near Barcelona, being on the same platform as the Seat Ibiza. With 4 meters 14 or 163 inches, the Arona is 22 centimeters or 9 inches shorter than the Seat Ateca. It is thought to be a city SUV and an alternative to a normal small car, where you can just sit it a little higher and you can get in and out more comfortably. For example, you sit 5 centimeters higher than in the Ibiza. You can also get full LED lights for the Arona, color combinations together with a contrasting roof color, and the biggest wheel size is 18 inch. The interior is more simple than those of the bigger siblings, like more hard-packed plastics at the ends of the door, but you also pay less money for it. You do sit more upright than in normal small cars, but you do not get the true SUV feeling that you already get in the Seat Ateca. However, you almost make it to any parking spot in the city with that short length. Also, the smallest SUV at Seat offers digital instruments as an option and a big 8-inch screen. Surprisingly, you can still sit with tall adults in the rear of the Seat Arona. Both works as for the legroom and the headroom. It's just that the boot volume is 400 liters to 1280 liters. That's 100 and 300 liters less each than the Ateca, and definitely way shorter in length. Engines are a 1.6 liter TDI, a 1.5 liter TSI and the small 1 liter TSI. Very interesting that the Arona also offers TGI, meaning a CNG drivetrain for natural gas. Base price of the Seat Arona is 16,000 euros in Germany, that's 5,000 euros less than the Ateca, and 17,000 pounds in the UK. So that was very interesting. Let's now take all those cars into one shot and later drive them in their respective cities. Let's go back to Tarraco, back to Tarragona.
If you're familiar with Spain or the Spanish, the one thing you will know is that they are fiercely proud of anything that is produced in this country. And that's why in 1950, when Seat, the brand, emerged, the Spanish went crazy for it. And it developed something of a reputation. All of that changed, of course, in 1986 when it was bought by the Volkswagen Group. And there have been some highs and lows in that relationship, but it has produced some real winners. I think none more so than their new lineup of SUVs, and that's what we are here today to tell you all about. So we don't just have one, we now have the full Seat lineup of SUVs, ranging from the large Tarraco through to the smaller Arona. So if you're in the market for thinking that maybe you might be ready to commit to an SUV and that Seat's interesting to you, hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions for you today. But not only that, obviously, it wouldn't be right to come to Spain to look at these cars without having the opportunity to visit all the places that gave them their names, to tell you a little bit more about that special Seat culture. None of these cars are brand new on the market, so we're not going to spend a huge amount of time here telling you all about the features of the individual models. We're just going to give you an overview. If you want our in-depth reviews of these cars, then please have a look in the comments below and we will link to those pieces. But it would be a waste of the opportunity not to talk about some of the styling features while we have them all together so beautifully displayed. Now, similarly, I can't stand here and not mention what we're standing behind. This is the famous Roman aqueduct of Tarragona, which I think is a really perfect setting for the cars. One of the most interesting elements for me about car companies when they decide they want to introduce SUVs into their lineup is how they will go about carrying over the design characteristics that made their brands famous, but still make them look right in that larger format. Now, this was Seat's first attempt at that. This is the Ateca. And to say that it was a success, I think is probably a fair understatement. Not only were people very ready and very hungry for this car, but I think Seat did a really great job of keeping just enough design elements while bringing enough fresh new into this layout that it really makes you feel that something special has arrived. Let's have a look at that. Well, there's that angularity that we still expect from the other Seat models that's baked in, but there's also something new and fresh here. This honeycomb design on the grille really does give it a visual presence on the road. Look at the angular sweep of these headlamps, and they fit really nicely in with this chiseled effect through on the bonnet. All of which is to say there's a lot new and bold about this design from what had gone before at Seat, and it's brought to this design without looking like it's just a rehash of what have gone before. It's actually genuinely new and fresh. Well, you could make an argument that this was the easy one because it was the first and therefore it didn't have anything to live up to. It also was the car that they wanted to start with. So when it came to produce something a little bit smaller, the Arona, how much of that design language would stay? Well, quite a lot, as you can see, but it's been nicely adapted to fit a smaller body. We still have that chiseled effect here on the bonnet, we still have the angularity in the lights, and we still have that honeycombing effect on the grille, both upper and lower. But it has all been reduced visually to make it look a lot more compact and dynamic. So this car to me says much more city runaround than the Ateca, albeit that the styles are very similar. Now, everything changed again slightly earlier on when the largest beast of the bunch came into play, and that is the Tarraco. I don't know if you had the chance to see us give that a run around in Stige earlier on in the year, but we have one over here so we can take a look and see how that style really impacted once you put it into a larger body. Well, larger body means not only more visual presence, but also bigger, bolder statements, and you can see that here. The styling has changed. If we look at the bonnet, we have these creases rather than that flat chiseled effect on the bonnet. Why is that happening? Well, if the trick is to give the smaller vehicles more visual presence, once you get into the larger territory, the idea is to slightly reduce that so it doesn't have so much weight on the road and it still looks like it has the dynamism that you want. So we still have the angularity in the lights, we still have a very particular grille, but the honeycombing has gone, much more stylized with this chrome effect into the plastic, and a generally larger, bolder statement on the road. Well, for me, I have to say I'm still a fan of the first favorite of all, so I really like the Ateca. 3 cars now. Which one do you think works best visually? Tell us below. Built over 2,000 years ago during the reign of Emperor Augustus, this bridge was produced by the Romans in order to supply water to the ancient city of Tarraco. Well, now Tarragona, as you can see, it's not doing much in the way of supplying water to anyone, but the fact that it still stands is a testament to this region's particular commitment to engineering. Well, okay, the Tarraco isn't quite as impressive to look at, and it didn't take quite as long to produce, but it's still very impressive in lots of different ways. Let's take a closer look to find out how. Once you get driving around the foothills of Tarragona, you start noticing some pretty distinctive things about them, and that's not accidental. If you don't know or you're not familiar with the geography in Spain, Tarragona is in the Catalonia region and it's very distinctive. And that's not a bad place to come with the Tarraco, because clearly within Seat's lineup of SUVs, this is designed to be the largest and therefore most impressive of the offerings, and obviously it needs to be a little more distinctive from what came before. It only launched at the end of last year, but crowd reaction has already been incredibly positive, and that's quite impressive given how crowded the field of competitors for this profile of vehicle actually is. Well, the car itself has a full range of different options available, but it comes in at its most basic entry level at around about just under 30,000 euro, which again, for a car of this size and profile, is really not bad pricing at all. But let's not kid ourselves. Once you start adding in those optional extras, which you're definitely going to want, and getting the equipment line that's right for the car, you can spend all the way up to around about 53 to 54,000. This one is coming in, the one that we're driving, at around about the late 40s, mid to late 40s. We are driving the most powerful of the diesel engines available. That's a 2 litre producing 190 horsepower. It comes equipped with a 7-speed DSG and it's the Excellence package. So that means you get a nice trim, and we've got lots of bells and whistles in terms of assistance systems. Okay, none of that really tells you what you need to know, and that is, 1, does this car deliver at its price point? And 2, is it pleasant to drive? Well, if you haven't seen our review, we go into a great deal of detail. We will link to that in the comments below so you can take a much closer, in-depth look at everything. Today, what we're doing is just taking an overview of the car and comparing it to the rest of Seat's SUV lineup. Well, the first thing that you notice when you start driving the Tarraco is how pleasingly nimble it is for a car of this size. Now, don't forget, we are driving the largest of the diesel engines. A little later on, when we get some more open road, I'll show you a little bit of the acceleration that's available in here. What I can tell you for now is it's a lot lighter on the road than you assume. Okay, if you live somewhere that's got small, windy streets, city, closed town, that size might start to make you question whether you could have coped with something a little bit smaller. But out here, where we have plenty of open road and really the opportunity to get the most out of the drive, the space doesn't feel too large at all. The drive is really comfortable and assured. As I said, the most significant thing about the experience of driving the car right off the bat is how nimble it is. That larger of the diesel engines isn't really making me add to the weight that much, and when I put my foot down, there's still a more than comfortable response, which is nice. Well, we have a bit of an opportunity to see some of the landscape and terrain around this area, and it's just as rugged as this car is. Now, let's not kid ourselves. When most manufacturers sell you an SUV, they are not intending for you to drive down the side of a hill or really through the middle of a river in it. And this isn't any different. We do have driving modes here which allow us to get into some slightly off-road conditions, but first and foremost, this is an SUV that's designed for transporting people in good comfort for long distances. Talking about that, let's have a quick word about the seat. Seating position is good. I'm 1.78 m or 5'10", and as you can see, even with the decreased height that the panoramic roof liner gives me, I've got plenty of available headspace here. The seat's comfortable and supportive. We did take the opportunity to throw the car around a few corners just to see how it would behave earlier on, and I have to tell you, the seat holds you nicely. What we will come on to, hopefully if the traffic's good a little bit later on, is how the car itself behaves. And I'm happy to say that the setup combined with the chassis gives you a very good driving experience. Perfect example, when you come off the highway going at speed and you need to take the exit ramp, and okay, you want to find out how the car roll performs. It really handles very nicely. There's not nearly as much as you might expect from this size of vehicle. The key reason for that is a lot of the weight has been saved, and that should deliver a pretty pleasant fuel efficiency figure for a car of this size too. Well, more on that later. Obviously, we're going to give you that number as soon as we have figured out what it is. But for now, drive is comfortable, it's assured, the steering is light but not too light, it's crisp and responsive, brakes are excellent, and I'm just feeling very comfortable and relaxed. Thomas, are you enjoying the ride?
Yes, I agree completely.
Excellent.
Really nice.
Excellent. Well, we just need to look for a little bit of open road so we can see what we can do with the power. Now I thought we were going to need another take, but we actually have enough space here to go for an overtake. Look at that. That's very pleasing indeed. It delivers the power in an assured manner. I never felt as if I needed more than I had, but at the same time, it really didn't try and convince me that it was something more than it is. So, 2 thumbs up for overtaking, maneuvering and handling on roads like this, but I think we need somewhere where we can go a little bit faster to find out how it handles the corners. So beyond the day-to-day use of shopping backwards and forwards in everyday life, What are you really buying a large SUV for? Well, surely this is it. Having it out on the open road and really being able to do a little bit of exploring. So it's always interesting to see how cars behave once you manage to put a few miles underneath the wheels. And I have to tell you, in this car, I've been really pleasantly surprised so far. Why pleasantly surprised? Well, being completely honest, large SUVs are not my first pick of car. Why? Well, I'm a big fan of efficiency, and everything about a large SUV says to me, we could have made it slightly different. But in this car, with the larger diesel, and I have to stress with the larger diesel, you get a surprising amount of the things that you like within the characteristic of a smaller vehicle, whilst having all of that extra space and comfort. If I'd fully loaded this thing up with family and equipment, because I have that extra power, I have no doubt that I'm going to be plenty capable of still enjoying my driving experience, but at the same time, I'm still benefiting from all of that extra room. Now, a lot of the time when we do reviews, there are just a couple of us here, but I have to tell you, because we're on a longer trip, we actually have 3 of us in the car today, and we have a fairly well-loaded boot as well. So the car isn't fully loaded, but it certainly isn't light either, and that really does give me the opportunity to test out both how the power is delivered. I'm on a nice incline at the moment. I put my foot down and I get exactly what I want. But also the agility. I've also thrown the car around a few corners to see how it handles, and the answer is really nicely. So I think, honestly, if I was looking to buy this car, I am first and foremost going to look at that larger engine. Does it need it? No, the smaller diesel would be absolutely fine. It's just that it gives you that much more enjoyment. What you like about driving a small car is its nippy, agile handling characteristics. You kind of figure you have to give up a lot of that when you move over to an SUV, especially a larger one. But there is more than enough driving enjoyment out of this thing with the larger engine to make you not worry about that transition. The handling, as I said, is excellent. And the DSG, well, okay, it might not be the most exciting thing in the world, but it is solid and it works really well in concert with the engine. So, we're comfortable, we're enjoying our handling, and we have all of the power we want. So I guess the next question is, do we really have enough of a reason to look at the smaller one? Now it's time to look at Seat's original SUV, the Seat Ateca, and where better to do that than Ateca itself. Ateca is a very small town, only has a population of about 2,000 people, and until 2016, when the Ateca launched, it wasn't so famous internationally. But needless to say, since the arrival of this car, a few more people know where it is. Where it is, in case you're not familiar with Spanish geography, is about 100 kilometers southwest of Zaragoza, so still in the northern part of Spain, but a little bit outside of the Catalan region. So, needless to say, the people of this town were more than a little bit excited when Seat decided to name their first SUV after the town. And you can see why. It's a lovely setting. It's also been rather a popular car. So let's take a look and see if we can figure out just why that is. we always knew that the Ateca was going to handle well on the smaller streets and side roads around the town of Ateca itself. But the question with the smaller SUV, when you're deciding should I go for size or power or what's my compromise, is will it ride as comfortably as its larger brother? Well, when the Ateca launched in 2016, I think it's fair to say that it won everybody over almost from the moment that it stepped on the stage. The design is really right for this size of car. It looks great and it feels great. Now, obviously you can't give Seat all of the credit. The idea had already been firmly introduced into the market with the Tiguan, so we kind of knew what it was, how it worked and how it would look. But this was a very big development for Seat because they of course hadn't had an SUV before the Ateca came out onto the scene. So there was a little bit of nerves in terms of how well received it would be. I think it's fair to say very, very well is the answer to that. On the face of it, this remains my favorite of the three SUVs that Seat offer. And I think the reason that it got introduced first is no accident. This represents the best compromise between size and usability in a small SUV. Simply put, because if you do live in a town or you even want to go to one, you don't want too much vehicle to be maneuvering around, and this feels small and nippy. But it isn't a compact SUV, so you still do get plenty of room up in the car. Now, there are a variety of engine choices available. The one that we are driving around in today comes with the most powerful of the petrol engines, and that's going to give you about 190 horsepower, and it's a 2-litre petrol. So the advantage with having a slightly smaller car is you don't really need that much power. You could go with one of the smaller ones, but of course if you have it, you can use it. And what's nice about the Ateca, because it is that much smaller, is that you really do get the responsiveness of that power direct to the car. It's there in the Tarraco as well, but obviously being a larger car and slightly heavier, it has to work that much harder to produce the response that you want. So again, personal taste, but for me, this is the ideal compromise for size, space, and usability. How's the drive working out? Well, we have the Excellence line. So in terms of what that does to you for pricing, the cheapest Ateca that you can get is somewhere around about 21,000 euro. This has the most powerful petrol, and it also comes with a 7-speed DSG, and it's the Excellence line. So realistically, given all the bells and whistles that we have, you're probably looking more in the region of late 30s for this car. And of course, if you want to go all out and load with more or less everything you can get your hands on, the top end is going to come in at around about mid 40s. So that should give you some perspective of where you're pitching. As far as the car itself is concerned, what I like most about it is that it represents a really good balance between value. There are a lot of cars now in this segment. There weren't so many in 2016, but there are now. And the value offering is really pitched nicely. But you still get a lot of car for that money, and you don't have to go crazy speccing it out just to get a car that's very usable and really appealing. So what does it boil down to? Well, a lot of that's going to come down to personal taste. As I said, for me, I like that balance between usability and still having a little bit of poise and discipline to the drive. This delivers really, really nicely on those points. Of course, with the larger petrol engine, you won't benefit from the same efficiencies, and you might find yourself paying just a little bit more in tax, but you are going to be having more fun when you want it. In the open roads around Ateca, you're really able to get the best out of this setup, and it's really nice. I guess if I had one slight niggle at the Tarraco earlier on, it would be that because the power steering is trying to get the best compromise possible to remove the size and the weight of the vehicle from your experience as a driver, the steering could be described as just a touch on the light side. Well, of course, that isn't necessary in the Ateca at all. So this very much feels exactly like the car that it is to drive. The gearbox works really nicely with the engine, and everything feels very balanced, well-rounded, but still fun and crisp. Driving through the arid, red, dusty landscape around Ateca really reminds me of one thing. The vast majority of everything that we do with our cars is work-based. It's short trips to and from work, maybe to school if you have kids there. Well, I hope you have kids there if you're taking trips to and from school, unless you're a teacher, of course. But once a year, if you're lucky, you get the opportunity to take your car out a little bit further afield. And so, as important as it is to make sure that your car answers all of your daily needs, I think it also has to remind you what it is you like about driving. What I get from the Ateca is that whilst it's practical and fun when you're on those small city roads, it really doesn't let you down when you get out into the countryside. Okay, it doesn't have quite the feeling of solidness that its larger brother has, but it has plenty enough to make it a very comfortable drive. Now, as was the case with the Tarraco, there are 3 of us in here and we are well loaded. So I really do have a good opportunity to see how it performs with extra weight in. I think it's worth noting that the trim level is just a little bit reduced from the Tarraco. The infotainment system's not quite as new. The materials aren't quite as plushly finished. But you know what? It really works for me. It's just the right level of delivery to make you feel that everything is exactly as it should be. There are newer infotainment systems, there are newer material finishes, but I have to be honest, I like things that just do exactly what they're supposed to be designed for. And that's absolutely what you get from the driving experience of this car. I'm able to largely ignore everything, except of course for the speed I'm driving and the fantastic views around this area. So, if you get the chance, maybe you should think about trying one of these out here as well. And now we come to our last and smallest of the Seat SUVs, the Seat Arona. And to bring you this, we had to travel just a little bit further. Arona is a town in Tenerife, and that is a small Spanish island just off the coast of Africa. So a little bit further, we are headed into town to show you where the car took its inspiration from. But before we get there, it would be a little bit remiss of us not to show you this. Standing above a sea of clouds, this is the world's 3rd highest volcano. Last erupted in 1910. Hopefully it won't be doing too much of that while we're here today, but it stands 3,718 meters above sea level and is really pretty spectacular to look at. So that's setting our expectations quite high for the drive on this car. Let's see if it can deliver just as well. Well, now we come on to the smallest and in theory then the most fun of Seat's SUVs. This is the Arona. And if it looks somewhat familiar to you, well, I think that's only to be expected. It is after all based on the Ibiza and borrows very heavily from it, not only stylistically, but of course in terms of its engine and its drive options. Now, we have the highest petrol engine. That's a 1.5 litre TSI, giving you 150 horsepower, and that's combined with a 6-speed manual gearbox. Now, although you can get the DSG, it's not available in all markets, so it's well worth checking if it's available in yours if that's the way you want to go. And I think that's a very good place to start talking about it. Manual gearboxes. Now, they used to be something that not only I, but many people would recommend over the automatics. And the reason for that was that the automatics just didn't give you quite the precision you wanted. But they've come on so much in the last 10 years that you can't recognize the quality of the drive in so many of them, which does rather make you feel very often how redundant is a manual gearbox as an offering for a car, which is why lots of cars now don't even come with them as an option, but it does usually help keep the price that little bit lower. Still, I am quite surprised that in not all markets can you get this car with a DSG. So it's interesting that Seat feel that their market research tells them that a lot of the drivers of this particular engine with this setup still go for that manual. So when we had the opportunity to really rip this round some of the winding mountain roads that you can find here, well, I thought that was an excellent chance to see how well the manual gearbox still holds up versus the DSG. And I'm happy to say that the answer is rather pleasingly, it still makes it an awful lot of fun. Well, you may or may not know this, but when Seat named their most recent SUV, they asked the people what they should call it. So the competition winner is what gave the car its name. Now, that wasn't the case with the Arona, and having the opportunity to come to all of these places that share the names with the cars does make you wonder to what extent there's any degree of selection over just saying, come on, we just need a Spanish name of a town and we'll call a car after that. Our key question for the Arona is how much of the Ibiza's driving characteristics has it managed to maintain? Well, fortunately, because we have the pleasure of lots of tight, windy roads here, we really do have the opportunity to throw the Arona around and see how much that extra height leans in to the body. Well, as you can see, even though I'm giving it a fair bit of speed through here, I don't have an excessive amount of body roll. And that's very pleasing indeed. Now, I would be a liar if I told you I thought you're going to have quite as much fun driving this round as an Ibiza Cupra, but obviously you are going to have to make some compromises for that increase in height and the change of the driving characteristic. But it hasn't all gone just because you want this higher vehicle. And if you're being bullied into buying one of these over the car that you really want, you don't need to feel too sad. Now, I think it's important to mention with the Arona over the Tarraco and Ateca that whereas those feel very much like SUVs by character and design, this does feel like an elevated small car. I think the trick is to give you the extra space and the feeling of light that you get with the larger experience, but not to have you notice that when you're driving it. Well, if you're used to driving the lower car, I can't deny you are going to notice a little bit more body roll, a little bit less stiffness, a little bit more, I don't know, less agility, but you are going to be very pleased with the amount that's remained. You can still really throw this into a corner, and when you exit, well, with this engine, you've got plenty of pickup to give you more than enough to keep smiling about. Now, obviously, as fun as it is to drive around the hills, you're going to spend most of your time in this car pottering around the town. That really is what this car is designed for and best at. So how does it behave? Well, this is where I'm slightly questioning the use of the manual gearbox. Let me just check I'm going in the right direction here. I'm not completely convinced that this is the best solution for this car. So I would check your markets. But if you're going to spend all of your time doing backwards and forwards and in and out of towns, the DSG is just so effortless and easy that it really works well, I think, in concert with this engine. The manual is fun, but you really do need to give it a fair bit of energy to get the best out of it. And needless to say, that's completely unnecessary and undesirable once it comes to town driving. Now, if you're used to a manual gearbox, it's completely fine. It really isn't a big deal. I just think given the profile of the car, the DSG suits it marginally better. Thomas, is that fair? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with you. You're completely right.
Oh, I got it completely right from Thomas. That doesn't happen every day. So that makes me happy. Well, we've had the chance to do a little bit of windy driving. We've had the chance to see how it behaves around town. And now we're going to answer a new question for this type of SUV. Okay, it's fun. It's still nippy enough to give you a lot of excitement on some bends. But realistically, are you going to want to sit on a highway in this vehicle for any length of time? That's always been the biggest criticism of small cars. They are fun, they are exciting, but they don't travel distance too well. Well, we have a somewhat less than exciting drive back to the airport here, and it is all highway. So we're going to take a look and see how this behaves once you start putting some miles underneath it. Well, it does seem something of a shame, having seen so much stunning scenery in Tenerife, that we're finishing off our driving section here on the Autobahn, which I have to tell you is not the most appealing part of the landscape on this island, but we really felt it was important to give you a sense of how this small car behaves once you have it at speed and on the highway. So I think it's reasonable to say more or less as you expect. That might sound fairly obvious, but obviously with the increased height, you get a lot more wind action, as you may be able to hear on the audio track. The soundproofing here is definitely showing you the difference in characteristic between this and its larger brothers. So let's have a brief chat about pricing. Well, the entrance level on the Arona comes in just around about over 16,000 euro. This one with its larger engine, and it's an FR, so it's got all of the spec that entails, and that's going to set you back around about 23,000. And if you want all of the whistles and bells that anyone can throw at you, you can't really spend a lot over 28. So I have to tell you, when you compare at price point, all of the things that in otherwise might make you think, I don't know, maybe I should have gone a little bigger. You know, there's a lot more use of hard plastics in the vehicle. None of that stuff bothers you at all, especially as a driver. I have to tell you, for a small car, this instrument layout is fantastic. If you want a lot more detail, check out the full review. But what I can tell you is that they've used that budget very well to deliver actually a premium driving experience in a smaller vehicle. So I would go with a higher spec. I definitely would go with a larger engine, because the car itself actually looks pretty stylish. And I don't really want to feel disappointed when I get in it. What I can tell you is, even though it's not an expensive proposition, when you get into this car, you actually feel good about sitting in it. That's conveyed by the seats too. They're nice and comfortable. We've put some miles down now. My back's still in good order, Thomas?
It's as good as yours.
Thomas says good also. So driving experience is nice. My road view is excellent, and everything is set out for me to enjoy the experience. But it is a car on the cheaper end of the offering, and because of that, we do have quite a lot of road noise. The road finish here is good, but as you may be able to hear, I'm having to speak a little louder because there is undoubtedly quite a lot of wind around the car. Now, again, you are going to experience a bit more of that than in its smaller brothers, because you just are that much higher. It presents a larger force. There's nothing else you can do about that. But the increase of height really does make highway driving actually a lot more pleasurable, I find. You really feel like you're supposed to be on the road and less nervous about the larger objects like trucks driving around you. It's comfortable, the gears are still nice and responsive, and as I would wish. I have to tell you, I'm still fairly sold on the idea of a DSG though, so please check your market and do give that a test drive before you make your final choice. So, the Arona in sum. If I have to be 100% honest, I'm still going to say that for me, it doesn't give me enough in that increase of height to justify switching out from the Ibiza. Why? Well, at all trim levels, that comes in around about 2,000 euro cheaper and delivers for that, in my experience, a somewhat better driving experience. But it is marginal. And if you're a person who either has challenges getting in or out of a car, that additional height is really hugely helpful. Or somebody who just wants that slightly elevated driving experience. Clearly, you've been wanting this for a very long time, and this car is going to deliver for you. What I can tell you is, if you're going to go with one of these, because you really have got to go for one of these, you won't be disappointed. There is still more than enough fun that you can have out of one of these. And the driving experience on the highway, whilst unquestionably not coming into the same ballpark as its two bigger brothers, is still perfectly pleasurable enough. So for my taste and my money, if I was going to go for one of these cars, for me it's the Ateca, hands down. That car, I think, is superbly designed in all respects and really hits all of its design briefs. I like this car. The Arona, I think, is fun and enjoyable to drive, but I can't drive it without wishing I was back in an Ibiza Cupra. And as for the Tarraco, well, it's just a little on the large side for me. It's still got a nice nimble handle and feel to it, but I think my heart lives with the Ateca. How about you, Thomas? What would you go with?
I will decide me for the Ateca too, because this is the best compromise of size and usability.
See, we're very compromising guys.
Yeah, we are.
But I'm pretty sure, now Thomas told me earlier, he actually has a friend who owns the Arona and she cannot say enough good about it. So I think a lot of it is about your profile and the kind of car that you most like to drive. So if you're thinking of a small compact SUV, I highly recommend that you give this car a try. But if you have an option to go just a little bigger, maybe you should give that a try too. Well, we finally made it to Arona, which is a small coastal community on the south side of the island of Tenerife. And unfortunately, it is notoriously difficult to find good filming locations in it. But really, the story was all about the drive of the car to get here. It's got a huge amount of individual characteristic, which if you've never been to Tenerife before, I can certainly say is something that it shares with the island and its inhabitants. So, hopefully that's given you a pretty decent overview of Seat's full lineup of SUVs. Don't forget, if you do want greater detail on any of them, just look below. We'll link to the full reviews down there so you can have a really good check. But in the meantime, this driving event has really offered us the chance to see the key differences between these three cars, and it doesn't just come down to size and cost. I think when you're considering buying an SUV, what you really have to ask yourself is, why do I need an SUV as opposed to its car-based counterpart? And that's best illustrated here with the Arona. Why? Well, essentially, the Ibiza is somewhat cheaper. You get a lot of the same features, but in a smaller, somewhat more economical package. However, what you're getting with this car clearly is a little bit more flair, more individuality. And I have to tell you, some of those less than driver-friendly curbs that we've been taking while we're doing our driving scenes demonstrate that that extra height that you get with an SUV isn't always such a total waste. Now, I think really you need to decide on what your priorities are if you're looking at an SUV. But the nice thing about Seat's lineup now is that they have something that answers your needs whatever they are. So if you've got a larger family, maybe the Tarraco is for you. Standard everyday use with a bit of mixed driving people around, then obviously the Ateca is going to be perfect. And the Arona, well, for me, this is an ideal city runaround. If there's just a couple of you, and maybe you're finding it a bit challenging to get in and out of a car that's lower down, this represents a really good alternative. I have to be honest, if you're talking smaller, my heart still belongs to the Ibiza. I really like the way that rips around the roads, and although they've done a really compelling job of changing a lot of those driving characteristics into the higher platform, you can't cheat physics, and I'm still missing the Ibiza Cupra really at my heart. But when you get larger up, I think the Ateca is an absolutely fantastic car. It answers every single one of its design briefs, and it really is a pleasure to use. The Tarraco, a little bit large for my tastes, but I think it's going to suit an awful lot of people. Certainly the sales numbers so far would seem to suggest that that's the case. Anyway, whichever one you go for, I think you're going to have an awful lot of fun test driving it and making sure that it's the right one for you. I hope you've enjoyed watching this as much as we've enjoyed making it. We hope we'll see you again soon. And don't forget, if you have any comments or questions, just pop them below. We've come to the Roman Circus here at Tarragona to take a look at where it all started. These are Seat concept cars that led us to their current lineup of SUVs. I've been joined by Xavier Villanueva, who is the exterior designer for Seat, and I think he's got a little bit of explaining to do. Xavier, there is clearly quite a lot that has happened since this first turned up to the current lineup that we have. Can you tell us a little bit about how on earth this came to be?
Well, this car is a car that has almost 20 years. We presented it in Paris in the motor show in the year 2000. And here we try to approach the crossover segment. And as designer, you always want the biggest wheels you can have and short overhangs and really compact cabin, and there we are. We have it there.
Let's just take a quick look at that, because first of all I have to say congratulations, because 20 years ago I think is a long time before a lot of the manufacturers are actually thinking about this type of crossover vehicle. Come on guys, you've got to be quite impressed by that. Have you ever seen wheels like that? And I'm not talking about one that's been home customized on a car like this. Tell me, this is not standard. This you have said before, and I've heard you, that the concept car is a designer's chance to dream.
Yeah.
What were you dreaming when you came up with this combination?
Yeah, this is, I think, is 780 the diameter. So definitely this car is a dream car. And here we introduced a lot of features that we have right now in cars from production. You can see, for example, this line that connects the A-pillar with the bonnet. This helps us to give direction to the lines, and we have fronts with a lot of character, and this is something we have in all of our in all of our SUVs right now. Other features like this dynamic line in the side, you can see it's kept during all our cars till now in a different way, different interpretations, but we still have a character line, very dynamic in the side, and a lot of sculpture as well. The belt line is really high. We always, as designers, want it high, so we can have a very compact DLO, the window graphic. And this line, it goes with a lot of movement to the rear. It's also part of the DNA of our brand. In all our SUVs is there. It helps us to have a very solid C-pillar, and makes it look very compact in the end.
Now, Xavier, originally, when this building was first built, it would hold up to 30,000 people who would come to watch chariot racing here. And I see you've attracted one or two fans of your own here, come to learn a bit more about the concept cars. Your job has to be one of the most exciting at Seat, because you get the chance to just go off and dream. But once you've had that dream, you have to work towards making it a reality, which brings us to our next step.
Yeah. In the Tribu, for example, you're right. Here we already saw that the SUV was the trend, or that we wanted to enter that segment with something very robust. And as you see, this car has all these features. Squarish wheel arches that you can see right now in the Seat Ateca, almost like that. And we introduced something that we also have right now, is this kind of eyebrow in the headlamps that give it an attitude very assertive. It's very important that we keep it in our cars from this one. Another element is this kind of X shape in the front that helps us to give width and nice wide stance to the car.
It's already starting to take on somewhat more of a familiar SUV appearance, and the whole design language is starting to look a little bit more credible. But you still have this big futuristic glass roof that doesn't really resemble what's coming next. But now we're getting to almost pre-production territory, right?
Yeah, the EVX that was presented in 2011 in Geneva. This car, definitely one of the main features are the front headlamps that are in LED, with the LED technology. We already saw that was coming, and we introduced this graphic that is very iconic, and it's right now part of our DNA as well. Other features are, of course, the connection of the A-pillar as well, and sorry, I turned this way. This graphics, this dynamic lines. Oh, sorry.
Oh, wait, the microphone got lost. Here we go.
These dynamic lines in the side that are almost like in the Arona right now, with this crispy and tense surface in the side.
Well, you must have been absolutely delighted to see. I can imagine the amount of work and effort that went into coming up with exactly this, and to see that on so many production models must put a smile on your face every single time you see one on the road.
Yeah, the front headlamps of the cars are the eyes of the cars, and we want our brand to have a clear identity and expressive feeling when you see it. And this iconic graphic is very powerful and clear.
All right, so if it's the designer's job to dream and it's the regulator's job to regulate, then the compromises that are necessary to move between a concept car and a full road production car are vast. What one thing, if you could reach into your magic bag and say, we can't really do it at the moment because the regulations, because the requirements, they won't quite allow us, but what one thing would you love to bring to a production vehicle?
From these three cars, you mean?
Any car.
What I would dream is to have the best aerodynamics and the most efficient engine, electric if it's possible, to be the most eco-friendly, to make the most eco-friendly SUV as possible.
That's a very honest, pragmatic answer. I was kind of hoping he was going to go with swimming pool on the roof or fold-out barbecue at the back. I don't know, but still. I think we can all hope that realistically we're going to be able to see that more and more going forwards anyway, and certainly looking at Seat's current lineup of SUVs, it's really nice to see how much of this idea generation is still in those vehicles. Thank you so much for taking your time to show us around these. They're great, and we can't wait to see what you come up with next.
Thank you very much.